Ooh, welcome to the Steven Cimino Says Boom Show, issue number 47.
Boom!
Hey everyone, welcome to Pop XP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the Pop XP channel.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Steven Cimino Says Boom Show, issue number 47. Before we go deeper into this, I'm going to put a little disclaimer here. On the Roy episode just before this, I called it issue 47, but Niall fixed it up, and on the writing he said 46. Hey, I wasn't thinking right with all that. We were in the negative zone at Roy's house with all that technical difficulty, but we made it work, and so what am I going to do? But now this is issue 47, and now, we got a big one today. Tell us what's up.
Yeah, well, first, what's up in that episode, man? You're going to have that nice little 46. So I did a nice little voiceover for you. But yeah, everyone knows the rules, the house rules. Look down below, click that subscribe button, smash that bell. This way you get notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content like this episode right here. And gentlemen, I'm happy because I'm a DC guy. And for almost 50 episodes, I've heard you two rattle off about Hulk and Thor and Avengers and Marvel and this and that. And I'll bring up some DC here and there. But now we actually get to dive into something a little deeper. So I'm pretty excited for what we have going on. So gentlemen, without further ado, take it away.
Oh, okay, Steve. Now, this is a perfect episode after Roy Thomas, after that live episode. And speaking of Marvel, here's a guy that we got on today that if there's anybody that holds a lot of parallels to Mr. Roy Thomas is this guy. Because this guy almost in succinct, like he just did the same things Roy did, and Roy goes to the top of the mountain, and this guy goes to the top of the mountain, and they make history. And how about this? This guy writes his heavy 50-pound book for DC. Roy writes this heavy 75-pound, this big book for Marvel. You can see it in the back there. It's incredible. Their knowledge of each. Oh, it's incredible. Steve, tell me what we can talk about, who's coming on today as a special guest. And I'm excited.
Well, we've had some good creators and some teams. We've talked about some real history. But for those of you who were around in the 1980s, and I know, Niall, you weren't there, but
I was little.
You were little. But in the 1980s, there were a couple of super teams and books out there that everyone was purchasing. You were either an X-Men fan, New Teen Titans fan, Fantastic Four fan, Avengers fan, or Legion of Superheroes fan. Okay? Ooh. Now you're probably thinking, well, what about the GLA? The Legion of Superheroes was the quintessential DC at the time. So I always remember seeing all these Legion of Superhero fans, and I would, when I became a retailer and dealer, I'd always look in there and say, Paul Levitz, keep giving, Paul Levitz, keep giving, Paul Levitz, keep giving. And then Paul Levitz's name all over the place. And so if you're wondering who is on today, it's Mr. Paul Levitz.
Ooh.
And again, he shares a lot of my love for fanzines and, history. Of course, he went into the DC history. So today we are going to get into the weeds with Paul, find out who, what, why, and when. Boom.
at that. He snuck in, Mr. Paul Levitz. How you doing, sir?
They let me out of the green room, I guess.
Yeah.
Good evening, guys.
Paul, you don't remember this, but back in 2007, this is where I knew you were a good guy, and I told Roy this.
I had for dinner tonight, John. You know, be gentle. 2007.
No,
My hair
what?
was colored.
You wait. Just to say something, your hair is kind of slightly exotic, like Roy's too. It just doesn't seem to be going anywhere, even through the passage of time.
Yeah, we're not going to say anything about hair.
Yeah, we're not talking about hair here.
But Paul, back in 2007, I was working. I had a production company that we were called Hero Envy, and I would go around to creators, and I would interview people. And back then, people kind of just, if they didn't have the time, they wouldn't do it. I remember Bruce Timm. He was like, I gotta go. He just didn't want nothing to do with me. But I went to you, and there was a lot of people around you, and you took the time to talk with me, and I asked you the question of Hulk versus Superman, who would win, just the stupid fanboy questions. But you took your time to talk with me, and I was like, and I wasn't really too educated on you then, but I really appreciated that, and you really took a very intellectual answer and approach, and I just want to tell you from the bottom of my heart, thank you for that, because I was getting thrown around by left and right. Nobody wanted to talk to me, but Paul Levitz talked to me.
Well, you're more than welcome, John. I assume that was at a convention, and the fun of being at conventions for me is a combination of a perpetual high school reunion, because I see an awful lot of people I literally know since I was in high school, and just meeting the people who care about the comics and getting a sense of what the pulse of the mood of the field is. You don't have too many fields you can be in where you can be immersed with as many of the people who are your readers, your consumers, your potential consumers, as comics. You dive in at a San Diego or New York Comicon or C2E2 these days in Chicago with the old Chicago cons, and you've got it. If you're not there to listen, if you're not there to connect with people, what's the point? So happy to know I was behaving that day. I certainly have my grumpy moments too, like everybody else.
But I know we said earlier that in our last episode we were live with Roy, and Roy being my best friend, and I know him so well, but it just the parallels you have, not just in what you've done in the industry, but also your attitude toward, like you just said, with the fans. Roy is always like that too. He's very giving. He loves the industry, despite whatever it turns into and all that. He's still an ambassador for comics, and you're the same way, that you still give that time, and you know the fan. And that's why I think you and Roy ascended as far as you have.
Well, look, both of us came from fandom, from a love of the medium, and that was our community. And Roy did an awful lot for bringing some of the first fans in after him. A lot of his gang from St. Louis and the area around that, Denny, Steve Gerber, buddies of mine.
Gary Friedrich,
who I didn't know it nearly as well. Don't know nearly as well. Gary's still around, sorry. But this is our community. This has been where we've lived for most of our adult lives. In my case, arguably a little bit before my adult life. And why not? Why not be among your people?
Well, let's go into that. Like the first question I usually ask is like how you got into comics, your first experience reading them, when little Paul Levitz was running around and he picked up his first comics, and you getting into the fanzine stuff and becoming a junior woodchuck, I assume, huh?
We got that nickname for our little crew running around.
Yeah, we can talk about that. So go ahead. Can you explain your origins?
You got to understand, in my generation, and I'm older, I think, than any of you guys. every American kid read comics. Some read them more passionately than others. Some read them more casually. But basically, from the time you learned to read till the time you discovered the opposite sex or the same sex, if that was your pleasure in life, or some enormous hobby that was all consuming for you, comics were a part of your life. There wasn't that much kids' entertainment on television, wasn't anything obviously equivalent to the internet or the smartphone, computer at your hands to get things to distract you. So we all read comics. And I'm sure I had some experience of them from when I was 3 or 4. The first one I remember possessing was a Superman in action comics that my babysitter gave me to shut me up one night when I was about 5 years old. And that's the one I fell in the rabbit hole with. They had an offer for a subscription for a year for $1 in it. And I talked my parents into that somehow. And suddenly there were comics coming regularly. And then I could go to the local grocery store and mom and pop candy store and dig through whatever had come in and find things. And that was the world of comics. That was a natural progression. What was unusual is that I didn't grow out of it. And a lot of the fans of my generation who were sort of active fans, and fans in my generation didn't just mean you read a lot of comics. It meant you did something. You sent letters into the companies trying to be published. You put out a little fanzine. You belonged to what was called an APA, the Amateur Press Alliances, where you sent fanzines to each other, basically, in a sense of community. You attended conventions. There were very few conventions, so it wasn't like now where, every weekend there's something somewhere, but you got off your ass and you found a way to get to New York for the big July 4th convention, or you got to one of the 3, 4, 5 little regional conventions. And by little, I mean little. The big New York convention was 3,000 people. The little conventions were a few hundred people. But the fans of my generation, for whatever reason in the material, whether it was the stories that were being told, both in the early Marvels, Julie Schwartz's DC's particularly, were aimed at the smart kids. And that generation of fans ended up either coming into the comic book industry in many cases, or becoming really interesting successes doing a whole bunch of other stuff that doesn't really relate specifically to the comics world, but often relates to the publishing experience or the communication experience they had in fandom. So one of the other Brooklyn fans who helped with my fanzine ended up being both a stunt guy in the movies. Okay, that's real physical. But he also has published something like 105 stories or books by now. Another one of the Brooklyn fans from my community is apparently the best writer on business travel on the web, and respected as that. And you sort of go down the list and you say, all right, so this one went into comics for a minute and liked it and stayed. This one came in and didn't like it and ran away. But people did interesting things. This was really a bright community of people. We didn't necessarily have the best social skills. We weren't certainly the most popular kids in our school. Bookworms were not, whether comic bookworms or prose bookworms. So we gravitated to each other, and it was really a lovely community. I discovered the fanzine world, I guess, at about 10 or 11 years old. A friend had a copy of one and showed it to me. Started reading them. Saw some of the early copies of Roy's Alter Ego, back the first run of Alter Ego 1,000 years ago, Wits End, things like that were being published in the 60s. And found Don and Maggie's Newfangles, which was the best news source of the era. I mean, it was a little mimeographed thing, a few pages long. Didn't get a lot of cooperation from the publishers in those days. The publishers weren't telling the readers when the next issue was coming out of a comic or who the writers and artists were, because kids are going to buy the comic based on whether or not there's a gorilla on it. They're not going to
Yeah.
They don't know who Roy Thomas is. They don't know who Edmund Hamilton is or Jim Shooter. They'll make it. They may know who Superman is. They may know who Spider-Man is, but they may just think that's a gorilla. That's really cool. I'd like to try that. DC Comics apparently sold better when they had talking gorillas on the cover.
Yeah, I heard that.
Legend of the industry. So Don and Maggie were the best news source, and sitting around with a good buddy, Paul Kupperberg, one winter day in my living room, and we get a new issue of Newfangles, and Don and Maggie say they're going to stop at the end of the year. And they were a young married couple. They were starting to have a life. They loved comics. They loved science fiction, but Don had a day job. Maggie was writing stuff. They had a couple of kids to raise. This was a big deal. So they said, we got to give up. We're sorry. You can subscribe till the end of the year, people, but that's it. And Paul and I look at each other and say, we're not going to know what's going on. We scrape up $16 between the two of us. That was a little more money in 1971 than it is now, but
yeah.
Money. We make some cold calls to DC and Marvel and get some of their basic propaganda sent to us, patch it together into a few pages of fanzine, take it to the local print shop, print up a few copies, send it out to places like Newfangles to say, hey, here, please, we're here. Maybe give us a plug. And Don and send it out to all the comic book companies and announce our existence, I guess. And Don and Maggie give us a nice plug. That gets us a few readers. Kupperberg drops out after a couple months. I stick with it. And Mark Hannerfeld, who'd been the last editor of a fanzine called The Comic Reader, which was a spin-off from the original alter ego 1,000 years before, comes up to me one day in the DC offices with a manila envelope full of nickels, dimes, and quarters, and index cards with people's names on it. Here, Paul, I'm not doing The Comic Reader anymore. You're basically doing what I set out to do. Would you take the money and fulfill the subscriptions for these people? And so suddenly I was the largest circulation fanzine that had any content at the time.
Wow.
Okay. I did that for about 3 years. In those days, 95% of the very small population of comics writers and artists were in the New York metro area, because you had to be. There was no FedEx. There was no digital sending in your work. Who want to trust the U.S. mail? And the companies really didn't want to deal with anybody outside New York. I mean, if you were Jack Kirby and you moved to California, they'd put up with it. But if you were some schmo, you're in California. We don't want to make it. We don't want to make a long distance phone call to have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
It costs money, right?
Yeah.
So everybody was here, and they liked finding out when their stories were going to appear, because the companies weren't telling them either. And in a lot of cases, the companies weren't reliably giving them comp copies, so they would know when to pick up their own stories. They could have it for their collection if they cared. And if not, it was just nice to see their name in print and acknowledged about their work, because a lot of these guys had been working for ages without any form of recognition. So we learned about the business that way. And I'm walking through the halls of DC one day when I'm 16 years old. I'm a high school senior. Joe Orlando calls me into his office and asks me if I want to write his letter columns. I'm not a writer, Joe. He said, I read your fanzine. You write well enough to write a letter column.
Wow.
Not a very high bar. But so suddenly at 16, I'm a professional writer, sort of. And a few months go by of doing that, doing some other text pages for DC, sort of their equivalent to the bullpen page at the time. And Joe's then assistant, Michael Fleischer, is going to take the whole summer off. He's got some big project he's working on. Would I like to fill in? That's a tough decision. 16-year-old kid graduating high school, filling in and being on the masthead at can't count the number of labor laws they were breaking in the process. Sure. And Michael never came back, and I never left.
Wow.
That's awesome.
It couldn't happen today. I mean,
Yeah.
most of my career couldn't happen today.
Yeah.
But
It's a shame. I think that whole aspect of kind of, the way we used to get into, industries and stuff, right? And just the way the doors would open. There's such a great story like yours that happens, but nowadays we don't have those kind of exciting stories anymore. You just kind of take your resume and go on Indeed and wish for the best.
Wow.
It's a different world. On the other hand, becoming an entrepreneur is perhaps easier today than it ever was. Connecting
True.
with people, the resources you can get through the internet. We live in our times,
Mhm.
and hopefully you make the best of them.
Well, go ahead, Steve.
Yes, it's fascinating you say, living in your times or our times. I want to go back a little bit further. Obviously, you started off with a subscription to Action Comics. Now, when you went down to the store and you saw the new comic rack, and maybe you had a little bit of money and you were able to expand beyond Action Comics, what was it that you really gravitated towards? I mean, obviously you've been reading Action for a while, and what was it that is there anything that you read for the first time and went, oh my word, this is unbelievable?
Well, my mother restricted me to 3 comics a week. Comics are not very good for your eyes. I think she had taken some courses with Frederick Wortham when she was in college.
Oh, wow.
As an adult, maybe she had a little influence from him. I'm not entirely sure. Never got the story entirely straight on that. But she certainly gave me thousands of real books to read, and happily took me to the used bookstore and didn't mind if I was buying back issues of comics. There were a couple of used bookstores in Brooklyn that sold back issues for less than cover price originally, and then it crept up over time. The first comic series that I really loved and collected was Legion of Superheroes, which I would later get to write, which was
Wow.
great.
Really?
But I've realized in the years since, as I sort of looked at my buying pattern, I liked the muchness. I liked where there was a lot of characters, a lot of colorful characters. So superhero groups were what caught my eye. I had a friend on the block who was a big fan of Fantastic Four, who would ultimately get his subscription to that, or maybe I got that for him as a birthday present because I knew it was his favorite comic. Never got into Fantastic Four. As an adult, I recognized that it was actually better written and better drawn than most of the comics I was enjoying, but it was 4 people in pretty much the same suit. And that somehow didn't connect to me as powerfully. But so Legion, Justice League, and then finally when I was about 12 years old, and 11 years old, I guess, and graduating elementary school, my dad took a week off from work. He was the president of the school PTA, so he was involved in a bunch of the different ceremonial nonsense. And he didn't really give a damn about mom's limitation on the 3 comics. As long as it made me happy and I was reading, he used to read Doc Savage, pulps and things like that when he was a kid. So I was able to buy a few more things. And, this Avengers comic, it's got a lot of interesting things on the cover. And so I come in at about Avengers 54, I think it is.
Oof, wow.
I had seen a few Marvel comics in the years before that in other kids' collections, but I'd never had the opportunity to really dive deeply into them. So I come in a little late, but I like that. And, I go back and end up collecting the whole run of that, collecting. And the shelves behind me have basically the first 30 years of Marvel on them. I stopped in 89. At that point, I figured I was likely never going to get a chance to write for them. And if I did, they'd give me whatever reference I needed.
Wow. Wow. That's interesting. Like, so, okay. So now you get your first gig with DC, and then when did you really start getting a feel for it? You're 16 years old, starting to write stuff, doing little things. But now, when you start really getting your feel, and what was the comic that you were doing?
It's hard for me to be objective about that. I guess I start writing stories about a year into it, and I'm 17, 18 when I'm writing Aquaman. That's probably the first thing anybody pats me on the head and says, maybe those stories sort of make sense. Um, and around that same time, I get to write what turns out to be only a 4-issue long comic, but start a new comic thing called Stalker with art by Steve Ditko and Wally Wood. And first thing you create in comics, you get Steve Ditko and Wally Wood.
Yeah,
I know.
Skill to do that? No, you have to be in the right place at the right time and have dumb luck. And I was. I don't know. I don't know if I had any intelligent self-consciousness of when I was starting to know what I was doing. But, I was after about, well, I guess I was an assistant editor, I guess, for about 5 years. And by the end of that time, 4.5 years, something like that, I seemed to know as much as any of my peers and be getting as many compliments as my peers. So I guess I'm doing all right. I still thought I was going to have to do something else with my life. I was still cramming my college courses into a couple of days a week, figuring I'd have to get a real job. But Jeanette Kahn shows up at DC, starts shaking things up, and I get a chance to go full-time as a full editor. I got enough saved up I can finish college if I ever need to. I'll take a shot at this. I'm enjoying it. And I take my shot.
Wow. Go ahead, Steve. Wow.
Yeah, see, this is a really fascinating aspect I want to delve into here, because obviously you're very famous for the Legion of Superheroes, and many people equate your Legion of Superheroes as, quintessential in many ways. So, I'm also reminded of Jim Shooter. Now, Jim Shooter, of course, was very young, and the legend is that he thought, well, I have some ideas for some stories they don't seem to be doing. I think I'll just stop doing stuff. Now, when you have the assignment to do the Legion of Superheroes, and you're sitting there, I don't know whether you had a typewriter or whatever you did, but was your mind abuzz with all the stuff that you had read before, and you were thinking, I've always wanted to try and do this and do that? Or how did you go about setting that stuff in motion? How was your imagination going with this Legion of Superheroes?
Well, I have to parse the question into two pieces, Steve. One, I went back and I reread the entire run of the book from the beginning. I've always been a research guy. So I had notebooks full in the pre-internet days of, this is the real name, this is the powers, this is what Jim Shooter had in a story, this is what Ed Hamilton had in a story. Jim was one of the people who inspired me to believe I could be in comics, because I read one of the letter columns when I'm a kid, and it says the 13-year-old Jim Shooter has done this, and it's like, well, I'm going to be 13 someday. Jim's about 5 years older than I am. That was plausible as opposed to the illustrious grown-ups who usually did the stuff. I don't know that I'll be as old as them for 1,000 years. Of course, I'm older now than all of them put together, probably. But so I had a great deal of core material to go on. This character loves this character hates this character. And then I had my own inferences from that. Well, if that's the background of the character, they ought to feel this way about the other character. And every writer has a different method of parsing human life and thinking about it. And mine relies heavily on what the experience of the person is as a predictor of what their behaviors might be. The other half of your question is sort of the inspiration versus perspiration question. I'm an assignment guy. I don't have a lot of ideas for something until somebody asks me for an idea for something.
Okay.
And Julie Schwartz in the later years would yell out in the hall, Paul, you got any ideas for a DC Comics Presents the Superman team-up book? No, Julie, but give me 15 minutes. and I'd go off and I'd sit in the corner and think about, all right, which characters haven't we had in DC Presents? Oh, he hasn't done one with Green Lantern yet. That could be fun. And I'd come back to Julie with a cover idea of Green Lantern crashing down and handing the power ring to Clark Kent. Here, you take this and you finish the case. And from Julie said, great, plot that as a story, make that into a real story. And we'd go back and forth and go from there. So it wasn't like I had 100 ideas for what I wanted to do in the Legion, but I had a sense of what the world of the Legion was. And it's a very expansive one because there's so many planets in the cosmology, such deep backgrounds for the characters. And it had been written by a lot of really great writers. I mean, the first Legion stories by Otto Binder, who was a great science fiction writer. There's a large body of the Legion stories written by Ed Hamilton, who was one of the great science fiction pulp writers. Jim does several years after that, and he was one of the smartest young writers in the business in the years he was doing it, and brought a lot of new characters and new ideas in, new drama. So I was inheriting something that had a lot of puzzle pieces in the box that you could put together. And then it was up to me what I was going to add on to the puzzle.
Wow. Go ahead now.
Yeah. So I kind of want to touch base a bit on, you were doing your fanzine, right? And you were getting, media and things from other comic book publishing houses and whatnot. And you mentioned going into DC a lot. Now, were you also going into the offices of Marvel?
Yeah, as often as I could. Or, speaking of Roy was a good source. He was very helpful. And I would stand in the hall of my high school where there was a payphone and throw nickels and quarters in as he was going on about whatever the current information was. A lot of the guys.
That's awesome.
And there are a series of the different Marvel assistant editors. I didn't go up to the Marvel offices as often as the DC offices because the Marvel offices were tiny. And in those days, I'd go up and hang out in the editorial room, and you basically sat on the Xerox machine because there might not have been a guest chair with the two assistant editors who were the whole editorial staff. Stan and Roy would have a little better space somewhere off in the corner, but not much better. DC, which was a much more successful company for the previous decade or 15 years, had built up enough momentum that they had more comfortable offices, more space, and more room to hang out in.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Now
and
as you're going...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was saying, and you can just hang out there? Like nobody threw you out? You were just that's Paul.
Basically.
That's so awesome.
Well, once you were part of the community, you were part of a community. There was a coffee break room.
Yeah. I would have loved that. Oh my God.
And, Adams and Kaluta are sitting there arguing about something. And, I'm a 16-year-old kid listening to all of this.
Oh my God.
You
talk about soaking that all up like a sponge. That would have been that must have been incredible.
And like I said, I'm not the only guy who was doing that.
Oh.
But most of the New York kids who were seriously interested in comics in those years got a shot at going into the business and doing whatever it was they were interested in or good at. And some of them came in and stayed a minute and said, this is a lousy business. I'm not hanging around. I'm going to go do something grown up. And some of them wanted to hang around and, like any other job, either didn't have the appropriate skills or didn't get along with the boss or whatever, didn't work out. And a lot of us just came in and didn't grow up. We were the lost boys.
Now you're given this opportunity, right? Because now you're going into the DC offices. This opportunity comes to you. Now, when you went in, because we've had other guests on and they've kind of talked about this where, they didn't want to jump the gun and be like, I have this idea and I have that idea, trying to push things. When you went into this new opportunity, were you holding back anything as you were coming in, or were you just kind of going with the flow?
I was, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I didn't think I wasn't aspiring to be a writer in life, so it wasn't like I had notebooks full of ideas. This was great. You want me to do text pages? I can do text pages. You want me to be an assistant editor? What does that involve? Okay, I guess I can proofread things. I can fill out a voucher. I can make a Xerox as well as anybody else. Well, here, Paul, rewrite this script. Okay, I've now read a bunch of scripts. Look over my shoulder as I'm doing it, boss. Yeah, that was okay. You could have done this, you could have done that. And you learn from each of the people as you're doing it. And when I started writing, the different editors gave me different levels of feedback, different things that helped me grow. And you absorbed everything you could in the process. And of course, the social life, the community was all people who were in the same set of circumstances. A lot of my friends were 5 and 10 years older than I was, who were further along in their careers, but not that much further along in their careers. And that's what we would talk about, and for about 5 years, another thing I have in common with Roy is we're both poker players at different times in our youth.
Yeah.
And I was one of the guys who co-hosted a poker game pretty regularly on Friday nights for about 5 years. And who was my poker game? It was Len Wein, Marv Wolfman, Jim Shooter, Tom DeFalco, sometimes Chris Claremont, sometimes Frank Miller, Mike Barr, Marty Pasco, Roger Slifer, Steve Mitchell, Jack Abel, all comics people with deep lives in the field. And you talked about each other's work, and you talked about what was good, and you talked about what somebody else was doing over there, and who was proud of what they were doing right now, who was frustrated by what they were doing right now. What could we do in comics? What could this business be? How do we turn it into something more than it currently is?
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. Steve, before I give it to you, who is the best poker player? Who usually cleaned up at the end of the night?
It wasn't me. Denny was probably one of the better grown-ups when he was in a healthy state. Al Milgram was pretty solid in there. I swear Roger Slifer for about a year was using that as his main source of income, because he was only getting to color one comic a week for Marvel at that point. That's not enough to feed a gnat. But I did okay.
No comics got thrown into that pot? No comics?
Nah, comics aren't worth anything. No. Come on, you got to remember, the cover price of a comic was probably 20 cents, 25 cents days. Back issues weren't worth much. Original art wasn't worth anything. And that was a good thing, because none of us had any money anyway.
It was wristwatches and rings, whatever they had going into the pot.
Pink paper. Go ahead, Steve.
Leftovers.
So, obviously we've discussed the parallels that you had with Roy. Now, of course, Roy was editor-in-chief for a good space of time over at Marvel for a while. And I know you didn't have the same moniker, but you did become, basically the president of DC, and you were basically in charge, weren't you? So, how did you get that role, and who did you take over from? And did you actually enjoy that, or was that something that was like, oh my word, what have I done?
So I guess probably the largest difference between Roy's path and my path is I don't think Roy ever was particularly interested in the business of comics. His passion was for the contents of the material, the art form of doing comics, all of which I was interested and enjoyed. Certainly was more interested in than anyone at the beginning, probably, about the history of comics. I had some interest in that, nowhere near his level. But I was interested in the business of it. I had gone to school intending to get a 5-year bachelor master's degree in business, taken most of the basic coursework that you would have there. I expected to be a business guy when I grew up. So I started in the late 70s doing most of the administrative and business work that related to the editorial department, keeping people on deadline, the very simple kinds of contracts we had for the creative people in those years, occasionally making a deal to bring someone over from Marvel or somewhere else, and working closely with Jeanette Kahn, who was the publisher of the company at that time and who was in charge of the creative side of the business, but not the whole company. In '81, Jeanette got to be president of the company, and we'd been working together well. So my job shifted to become basically what you would in modern terms call the chief operating officer of the company. All of the operational business sides of the company started reporting to me. There wasn't much. I mean, this was a small company. It was about 40 people maybe at the time. But we were going to build a marketing department. We were going to build a licensing department. We were going to find a way to buy back our international rights from the agent who had the rights to them so that we could handle them ourselves. Obviously, I got control of the financial departments, things like that. And under a variety of titles, for the next 20 years, Jeanette's running the policies of the company, and she's running some really high-profile projects because that's her passion, and she's running the creative of the movie and TV work, and I'm running the nuts and bolts. And if it's a big decision, we're both involved, and she certainly has more votes than I have. Joe Orlando, Dick Giordano, who are the key editorial executives working for us, were usually in those processes as well. But I'm making the trains run and making sure the company makes profit, deciding how to build the industry, build the business. And that was a ball. And I was, as a comic book writer, I'm a pretty decent comic book writer. In the 80s, my style was in tune with the flavor of the day. So I was one of the more commercial writers of the period. But I'm not a writer who ever changed the business. When you look at guys like Denny at the critical moments in his career, Frank Miller, Alan Moore, a generation later, these guys changed how we write comics. Neil Gaiman, a few years after that. Other people outside the DC Marvel orbit certainly also, I don't mean to not acknowledge them. Everything that the Hernandez brothers off doing Love and Rockets. Long list of people. But there were only a handful of guys and gals who had any interest in the business of comics, any skill at business, who cared about comics. And some of them worked in the retail side of it, building retail businesses. Some worked in distribution. But in the publishing side of it, there weren't very many of us. So I felt I was using a more special set of my talents, and I was able to use them in a way that was good for the creative community, was good for building DC as a stronger business. And when we were winning, which was a lot of the time, was a lot of fun. And the company kept growing and changing, so I kept having new challenges. I couldn't see myself editing Batman for 30 years. I said, if I have to do the same job for 30 years, I'm going to shoot myself. But I could see myself changing a company over 30 years. And we grew it from what was basically a very small business to something with a worldwide cultural impact that was very, very powerful. And when Jeanette left to become a movie producer, I inherited her portion of the company as well. And the last, 7 years I was there, I was the president and publisher as chief executive.
Paul, hold on for 1 second. You're this is the stuff that, it boggles my mind. You're a kid picking up the comics, you're writing these fanzines, and now you're running the entire show. Did you second guess yourself, or are you already beyond that? I would have been like, this is incredible.
Look, it's a job like any other job. There's days when your boss pisses you off. There's the day when the HR person walks into your office and says, that person you really like on the third floor? They just set themselves on fire.
Yeah.
Would you come downstairs and help me sweep up the ashes? There's a day when you have to lay off people, not because they've done a shitty job, but because for one corporate reason or another, there's just not enough business to justify their job. So this lousy moments in doing the job, but I would walk out to my assistant's desk where she had the scratch pad of calls that I had gotten that I had to return, and there's an artist whose work I love. There's a movie director with a question. There's a distributor or retailer who I've worked with for a bunch of years and known and trusted. There's a printer. That was always cool. And that the fact that I got the job, the fact that, at 24, somebody made me the chief operating officer of a division of a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah.
What the fuck? I would never allow that. And it on a lot of levels, it makes no sense, but nobody thought the comic book business was worth going out and hiring someone who knew what they were doing.
But
there was no.
But Paul, but the thing is like you're reading Action Comics. Now you're controlling Superman's destiny. Like that's crazy to me. Like Batman, like these are my guys, and I have to make them work. And it's just so incredible. And you're sitting on like a copy machine as a young kid looking all that, and now everybody's coming to you. That's incredible. It's so crazy.
It's a weird life. It's a weird journey. And I got away with it for a very long time. I got to do more different things in the field than I would have ever expected to do. From the writing I was able to do to working with people like Chris Nolan on his Batman movies, to traveling the world for different projects and different events. It's been a really bizarre and interesting life, and certainly making far more money than I ever expected to in this business.
Yeah.
And I got lucky, and I had the necessary skills to take advantage of the luck and to try to put myself in a position where the luck could continue to happen.
Yeah. It's just like when I tell Roy this too, I'm like, how can you believe you're doing that? And he's just like, it's just a job. All right, Steve, go ahead. Those stuff like that drives me nuts.
But it is a job. You wake up, you go to work in the morning, and there's a bunch of things you got to do. And most of those things are things you've got to do.
Right.
And it's no different than if you're going into an auto repair shop and there's 20 Toyotas and one Lamborghini. And it's more fun to work on the Lamborghini, but you also got to get those Toyotas out of here today.
Yeah.
And the good news is we had some Lamborghinis.
Yeah.
We had a lot of Toyotas.
Yeah.
And you try things, and so I'm very proud of the work we did on things like Vertigo and Milestone. Became culturally important, and we did an awful lot of stuff we thought might become culturally important that nobody remembers, and probably we're really happy nobody remembers when we go back and look at it. But that's part of what you want to accomplish. I was looking at a young cousin's, it's like in one of the farm teams for baseball, college farm, whatever the college equivalent to farm teams is. I'm not a sports guy, so I'll get it wrong. But his parents were so proud, they sent around his batting average is 462. In the major, I know enough about sports. I know in the majors, if you had a 462, you'd be a superstar.
Oh God.
I'm not sure in the league he's in if that's a fabulous thing or if it's because the pitchers don't know how to pitch. But that's true in publishing also. You don't bat 1,000. You probably don't bat 400. You put out a lot of things, and if you look back and you're able to say, well, had a hand in Vertigo, had a hand in Milestone, had a hand in Watchmen, had a hand in Sandman. Okay, and I don't have to list and remember the 62 things that I had a hand in that we thought was a good idea that day, that thank God you don't remember. And most of them were somebody's favorite comic book, besides the writer, artist, and their mothers. But there weren't enough people besides the family members who cared about them.
Wow. Go ahead, Steve. Wow.
So I just wanted to delve a little bit more into your creative process here, especially after you stopped being the president of the company and you are suddenly back there and writing again, and you're doing Legion of Superheroes. I think it's the late 2000s, I think, that so there you are. When you took over that role again and you got home and you're like, okay, I'm going to be writing a Legion of Superheroes story. Was it just like a piece of cake? You just went back in there, or did you do your due diligence and research like you had done before and then strive forward?
Well, I had to do the due diligence because I hadn't been connected to it for a long time. I basically took off about 20 years from writing because when my kids were little, writing in comics, for the most part, was your side job. You had the day job that paid you a salary. This all descended from the pulp magazines. In the pulp magazines, they'd say, Steve, I need an editor for Doc Savage. You want the job? It pays $5 a week. You can't live on $5 a week? Well, you know what? Every week you can sell John a Shadow story because he's editing the Shadow and he needs somebody to write it. But by the way, he's going to sell you a Doc Savage story every week because he needs the extra $5 too. And that way you'll both eat and you'll both be happy. And that was largely how comics worked when I came in the business. So I, through the 80s, I was writing on weekends, but I had 2 little kids, and I wanted my weekends to be on the soccer field or take my daughter to dance class and see what she was doing there, things like that. So I stopped writing on a regular basis, and by then I was a vice president of the company. I was making a decent living. I could afford the lifestyle that we had achieved at that point. So, okay, I'll set this aside. When I come back to it, first of all, my skills are 20 years rusty. I've done a little bit of writing, but the culture has moved on.
Yeah.
Comics culture and real world culture. And my personal tastes are no longer a day ahead of the field as perhaps they were in the 80s. They're now maybe a day or 2 behind the field. So I both have to do a lot of research. I have to oil the joints like the Tin Man. And I do some stories that are okay, that are, I think, as good as the norm of what the company was publishing at that time. But I don't do anything the world remembers particularly fondly in the process. But I've kept at it, and I've done a few things that I'm proud of. Did a thing called Brooklyn Blood for Dark Horse. It was sort of a police procedural with supernatural overtones that I think is a really solid piece of work. I think this Avengers thing that's just come out for Marvel, partly because it's intended to be in the style of the 1960s, not the style of the 2020s. But the audience seems to be getting that and enjoying it for what it is.
Yeah, Paul, I was going to ask you that. Now, okay, you come to Marvel now. Like, how is that? Last time you were there, you were probably sitting on a Xerox machine, right? Like, it just.
Well, I mean, I was friends with pretty much all of the key people at Marvel over the years. I'd have dinner with Stan a few times a year when I was in LA because my inner comic fan couldn't resist it. I show up at his house. There's that lovely picture of you and Roy there, John, right at the end of Stan's life.
Yeah,
I wasn't there that close to the end, but in the later years, I'd show up. Okay, I'm going to be a grown up at dinner with you and Joan, but I brought my Avengers 1 to 16 bound volume for you to sign. You're going to do that. My 12-year-old, and then I'll be a grown-up later, Stan. Okay. Okay, Paul.
That's awesome.
And obviously he was always an enormous gentleman, as well as a great pleasure to play with. But so I was connected to Marvel that whole time. About 3 years ago, a little bit before the plague years started, Mark Waid was at one of their writers' conferences, summits, whatever they call them, and mentions to the gang, hey, Levitz's exclusive with DC has run out. He's doing stuff other places. He loved Avengers. I bet he'd do something for you guys if you asked him. And they have a conversation, which I'm not privy to, about whether hell had frozen over or not. And Tom Brevoort gives me a call and says, would you really like to do something? What would you like to do? And I say, look, I don't know who the current Avengers are. And it's probably beyond my human capacity to figure that out and figure out all the history. But if we can do something retro, I'd love to do something retro. And they debate it and they say, okay. So I go back and I reread Marvel from the beginning up to the point of the early Avengers. And I make my notes and I say, all right, so Giant Man uses these terms when he's speaking to the Wasp. And, this is how Iron Man was behaving then. And that's right, he had roller skates. I forgot he had cockamamie roller skates. And I make all my notes and I say, all right, so their most interesting villain of that early period is Kang. This is before Kang became the next big bad of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or at least before anyone told anyone that was the case. And we started the project, and it got held up for a long time because of COVID, as so many things in the world did.
Okay.
But Alan Davis was drawing beautiful pictures and adding to the story along the way, as a good artist does. And it came out, and we seem to be getting away with it. As I said to Tom, the audience seems to be getting it, and it seems to have sold okay. So, okay. Got away with that.
I know Steve will love what you're saying, but you're just the fact, and I know it sounds so simple, but just the fact that you go back and you start reading everything, and then you start immersing yourself and you take those notes. I know Steve gets all giddy with that, because that is something I think today's writers do not do. And you go back. No, it's just like you did it when you went to Legion. I mean, it was just ingrained to do that. Englehart did the same thing.
When I started editing Batman, I read every Batman story that had been published to that date. Now, that was more possible in 1978 than it is today. Today, by the time you did it, you'd be retired. But that's part of the process. You do your homework in these things. And I think there are certainly writers working today who do that and who immerse themselves in the material. There are other writers who don't have other ways of coming to things. A large portion of my best friends over the years have been professional writers, comic writers and otherwise. And I've watched people with incredibly different approaches to how they did their work and different attitudes towards their work. And it's not always predictive of whether something great comes out or not. You can have great work from the guys who are 100% inspiration and no apparent research. And you can have great work come out from the guys who are 100% perspiration in the way. We don't know what enables us to write really well. We know some things that stop us from writing really well as human beings. But there's a phrase a lawyer buddy of mine used often: something was necessary but not sufficient. And for me at least, research is necessary, but it's not always sufficient. And the missing ingredient you find out when you set your fingers on the keyboard, or when it comes out and you see how people react to it. And maybe the thing you thought was wonderful doesn't connect with people. Maybe you look back on it and shudder. I thought I was okay that day, and I had to turn something in. You know, I teach lots of courses related to comics today. One of them, every couple of years, Columbia lets me teach the American graphic novel in team teaching with one of their real professors. Delightful friend of mine, Jeremy Dauber, who wrote American Comics, A History for Norton about a year ago. Big, thick, incredibly well-researched book. Jeremy's a fabulous scholar. But Jeremy's a real academic. He's a tenured professor with a named chair at Columbia. He was a Rhodes Scholar, a Harvard brat before that. You know, when he does research, it's exhaustive beyond anything I could imagine. But when we team teach, he'll look at things occasionally and he'll say, you know, this clearly was influenced by this over here, or the intent of the people had to be this. And I'll occasionally raise my hand and say, the intent was to get a check on Friday. Or, you know, he'll look at something and he'll say, I remember one occasion we were talking about the rising influence of the European comics guys when heavy metal came out. And he was looking at one of the French artists and connecting that to Howard Chaykin's work and saying, you know, Chaykin clearly was inspired by this. I said, I'm not sure, Jeremy. And I, you know, take out my cell phone and I shoot Howie an email. And Howie shoots me and say, I hated his stuff.
Yeah. Sure, Chaykin said that a lot of things.
That doesn't necessarily mean Jeremy's wrong. You know, you can hate something and still be influenced by it.
Right.
Jeremy's right. The academic looks at the things differently than the practitioner. And I've had the joy of working with so many different practitioners in so many different media. You talked about Bruce Timm, you know, the animation guys, Bruce, Alan Burnett, Paul Dini, the TV guys. Wednesday was such a wonderful success this year. Alan Miles were the Smallville guys that we worked with back in the day. Sandman was so incredible on Netflix this year. You know, comes out, I shoot the guys a note. Well, who are the guys on it? David Goyer, who used to write with us, who's a friend. Alan Heinberg, who was a Legion fan, who loved my stuff and wrote for us a couple of times and did such a fabulous job on the first of the Gal Gadot Wonder Woman movies. Neil himself, of course, who's been a friend for decades now. You know, I've gotten to watch each of these people, and every one of them approaches something differently. We used to have a process at one period at DC where we would make the more junior editors come in with a year of their book and the plan for the next 6 months or year creatively, and present it to a bunch of us gray-haired people. And there's one time when the Green Lantern editor and writer brings in the plan for his writer, and we disagree completely about it. Something important has just happened in the Green Lantern book. Coast City has just been destroyed. And the next year of it really is not dealing with the ramifications. A city's been destroyed and nothing happens. Well, Archie Goodwin is sitting in the room, and Archie looks at it one way and has a whole separate set of questions. And Denny looks at it, and he looks at it in terms of the psychological dimension of the people and philosophically how that happens. And I look at it and say, wait a minute, when a city's destroyed, it's part of an ecosystem. And you have pipes that go to it, and you have other places that are dependent on it, and the suburbs relate to it. What happens to all of that? We're all thinking differently in parallel, but we're all different writers, and we all look at story different ways. And doesn't mean I can't write a story that's about human beings, or Denny can't write a story that's about technology, but we start off from a different place in how we approach it. And that's part of what makes reading things wonderful, right? You're reading authentic voices of creative people with different points of view.
Wow. Go ahead, Steve.
So, obviously we've got some people who are going to be watching this episode who I know are Marvel fanatics and maybe they're not aware of your DC material. And I'm sure they're probably wondering, about when you were doing your research and when you were doing your writing for the Avengers, was there any character or something that you really enjoyed more than you thought, or something that was surprising to you? Or was there something you were like, oh my word, this is like a dirge? Was there anything that sort of like going, oh, wait a minute, oh man, I wish I'd been writing this guy a long time?
Well, I've read all those books at some time or another. I won't claim to have read everything that's in the collection. I've got something like 40,000 comics sitting there on the other side of the room. But I'd certainly read all the early Marvels as I collected them. So there weren't surprises in it. These were comics that were written for kids. They were written for smart kids. There were nuggets within them that were rich if you looked for them. But most of the material leading up to Avengers 11, which is the point at which this story takes place, this is pretty early Stan. And he's still finding his voice in it. And there's very different levels of execution in all of it. Spider-Man is much better executed in that period, maybe, than the rest of them, because the chemistry of Stan and Steve, both of whom I knew well and worked with them. So I can read which lines are Stan's and which moments are Steve's. And can't swear that I'm right, but I'll bet on it. You watch the evolution. You watch that's where he's seeing how things connect to each other. That's where he's seeing the additive value of moving something from one place to another. And this is where, there isn't anything working that's connecting it together. A lot of it is the collaborative dynamic. One of the wonderful things about comics is that it's a collaborative medium, particularly the way that Stan worked, a lot of which I've followed in the path of, as Roy did. The idea of plot, have the pencils done, and then dialogue from it. And I think both Roy and I tended to do much more detailed plots than Stan ever did for that.
Yeah.
But still, it allowed the artist more room to change things, to choreograph things, to affect things. And for me, at least, it gives me the hopeful inspiration when I look at an artist's rendition of a facial expression to write a better line of dialogue than I might have come up with from scratch myself. When Stan was working with Jack, when Stan was working with Steve, these were brilliant talents at the best moment of their career. And 1 and 1 equals 17. He did good work with Dick Ayers and with Don Heck. Got better work out of both Dick and Don than any other writer or editor ever did. And I worked with both of those guys and liked them and respect them totally. But Stan got something out of them nobody else ever achieved. But 1 + 1 equaled maybe 2.5, maybe 3, depending on the day. Sergeant Fury, Dick somehow came together in a different way, and maybe their 1 and 1 equaled 5. But there was a period there with Jack and with Steve where it was just magic, and didn't mean they liked each other when it was finished, or that there isn't something to argue with about, which percentage of this came from this guy and which percentage came from that guy. But that's true for all of us. You look at Roy's work on Conan with so many different artists. There's a tonal shift when he goes from Barry Smith to John Buscema. I'm not arguing which one is better, they're just different because you, as a writer, you're reacting differently to those pages as they're crossing your desk. You want to write to what the artist does well, so you're changing your plots to say, "Oh, okay, this guy can do this. I got to give him a story that lets him show his best stuff, her best stuff, if it's a woman." And you're reacting to the stuff when it comes in, and you're getting inspiration from that that's affecting what you do. So it's a fascinating process, and a lot of the time, I think Roy's memory is probably better than mine, or was better than mine in our prime. Both of us are of the age where we can be forgiven if we're forgetting things. Where am I? But in a collaborative process, when you're done, half the time, you don't know which one of you contributed something.
Mhm.
You said apple, they said delicious, and it turned out that you put a Macintosh in there.
Yeah.
And you're both part of it, and it's an indissoluble solution.
Wow. Go ahead now.
So I have a question for you, because if you ever dive into the cesspool of social media, you see a lot of fans, even creators, a lot of butting of heads on, what's a good comic, what's a bad comic. The comic industry is dying. There never seems to be too many positive, comments and effects out there. But as someone that had ran, obviously a VP to a president, working with DC for so long, experiencing the wins, feeling the losses. In your opinion, do you think, that the comic industry is dying, or the quality of books that are coming out are, not as good as they once were?
Well, you got to define your terms for a moment, okay? Comics in America are more creatively diverse and more creatively energetic than they have been at any time for many decades now. Comic sales are larger than they've been for many decades now. Now, I count Dogman by Dav Pilkey in that.
Mhm.
That's a comic. It's packaged as a graphic novel. It's for kids. It's just as much a comic book as Avengers #1 was, or my Legion of Superheroes. Its intended audience may be younger than my intended audience was for Legion of Superheroes. I'm not sure the intended audience is a lot younger than it was for Avengers #1 way back in the day. Maybe a little bit. Certainly not a younger audience than over at DC that they were intending for Jimmy Olsen at that moment. The periodical comic, kind I grew up loving, is not at its greatest time in history. It has some challenges out there. Part of it is because you can now get anything there ever was. When I was a kid, if you wanted Batman, you had a choice of Batman or Detective Comics, or at some point Brave and Bold. And maybe your newsstand had all three at the same time. Most likely it only had one or two of them. Now, you can get any Batman story that was ever told. Well, I got to tell you, the odds that one of this month's issues of Batman are as good as Batman The Dark Knight Returns are about the same odds as winning the lottery. Somebody will be as good one of these days, and somebody has been as good one of these days, but it ain't very often. So if you have all the classics available to you, which is something that I very much wanted to happen in the industry, and I helped make happen, one of the unfortunate side effects is it makes it tougher to compete with the current product. So the run-of-the-mill comic is just a run-of-the-mill comic, and nobody cares quite as much. So either you got to make it better, or less frequent, or affected in some fashion, or find something else to say.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. All right, we're going to be wrapping this up in a second, Paul. But I do have a Roy question that I wanted to ask you, because he wanted me to ask you this. That that's pretty cool that you have another little, I don't know if you know this, you have another little attachment to Roy here. He said, and a few issues into the All-Star comics, Jerry Conway asked Roy to ghostwrite for him. And Roy said no, because if he's going to write a comic, his name was going to be on it, especially for All-Star comics. So he said no. And then, I don't know if you know this, but the comic was then given to you to write.
Oh.
Did you know that?
No, I didn't know. I didn't know Roy had been offered it. But that's.
He said he didn't know. Wow.
That I got to write All-Star as Jerry was leaving to go theoretically be editor-in-chief of Marvel. A gig that ultimately would last 3 weeks. And Jerry has many wonderful talents and was very good to me, but he was not particularly suited for the editor-in-chief job, particularly as it was.
No, I know, yeah.
And he discovered that quickly, which was a good thing.
Very quickly.
But they were sort of giving out the goodies, and I had been his assistant editor, and I loved the Justice Society. Again, large group of people, a lot of history, a lot of things to play with. So I was very happy to pick that up. But would have been very cool to see what Roy would have done with it. Absolutely.
Yeah. But as we know, his favorite comic of all time was the All-Stars comics, and he was not going to write that if he couldn't put his name on that. But it's just so interesting. It was given to you.
It's Roy's attitude makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
There's lots of things I wouldn't mind ghostwriting in life, but not the things that matter most to me.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to wrap this up. Steve, any last words for Mr. Levitz?
It's funny to see a name in the credit box for so many years and just go, oh wow, it's Paul Levitz, wow. And here you are, and we're communicating with you, and we're getting this firsthand information from you. And I just want to say, it's an honor to speak to you, to get these nuggets of information, because this is what this show is about. Back in the day, we had some great magazines. We had the Comics Journal, we had stuff like that. And these days, there's a lot of things out there that are very wishy-washy. And in this show, we try to give the creators some time, let them explain things, correct some things. So anyone that's watching this now is probably going to be like, oh, wow. Okay, so when they see that name, Paul Levitz, in the credit box, boom, they can associate it with you and what you've been saying here today. And that's, to me, is a great thing.
No?
Thank you. I mean, I think what you're doing is a modern magazine, right? I teach in Pace's Masters in Publishing program. And actually, the course material for tomorrow night is an analysis of both the economic monetization of books, magazines, and websites, and the utility structure. The economic term utility meaning what's the reward, what's the emotional value, the intellectual value of this form. When you look at it, you see that websites essentially provide the same utility that magazines did in so many ways, and largely are monetizing in some of the same ways. So it's not shocking that they're sucking the life out of the magazine business, but it's just a different way of delivering the same thing. And if it's done well and it's done conscientiously, and I'm glad to hear the attitude you're bringing to it, it gives you the same values as a good job in the others too. So keep going and good luck with it. And nice to drop by.
Okay, go ahead now.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say thank you for coming on and chatting with us. I've been a diehard DC fan since 87, 88. And, you've pretty much been a part of everything that I've loved about DC. I did fall off probably about 2011, but I've been popping in here or there.
About when I fell off too, so it doesn't bother.
Yeah, I think I heard, and I was like, well, you know what? I'm gonna go too. But no, there's so many questions I'd love to dive into with you on so many different aspects of your career and other things and other projects they may have had involvement in. But I just want to say thank you, because it's been it's a love I still have, and I still go to my back issues. I follow some new stuff, but thank you for your service.
Thank you for the contributions to my mortgage.
You're welcome. You entertain me, I feed you. There we go.
And then ending, Mr. Paul, I just want to say that just much like Steve said, that our podcast it's the magic of it. Like, you know, I know you don't think about it like maybe me and Steve does. Like, we would love to be on that Xerox with you, feeling that, but just the magic of you getting there and it going to where you did and being able to control the destiny of these heroes is just magical. It's a magical thing that you did, and your career is a magic. Absolutely.
I get the magic because I had it as a kid.
Mhm.
And, you know, when Julie Schwartz, who knew I was a science fiction fan growing up, yells down the hall, "Paul, come in here." And says, "Say hi to Ike." Dr. Asimov? And I'm melting on the floor in front of this guy who's written 300 books, and I've probably read 150 or 200 of them by that time. I know the magic. I don't have the magic about my own life and about my own work because it was my own work.
Right.
To have the magic, you can't be on the stage. If you're on the stage and you think you're doing magic, you're so goddamn full of yourself. It doesn't become magic.
Right.
But our industry's never had that.
Every creative. But in the reverse, if you stick with being on the stage and doing the magic trick, doing the pulling the rabbit out of a hat. I did an event, I don't know, a decade ago with Neil Gaiman at Columbia, and during the discussion part of it, I raised the point with Neil. I said, you know, I think actually you created the only modern mythology in comics, because mythology was about characters that explained the forces we didn't understand and that terrified us. The thunder, lightning, earthquake, all of those things, death. And I said, and the characters you invented, particularly for sort of the college age kids, that's the terrifying forces. What is my destiny? Death, certainly. Delirium, they're often in the process of discovering what delirium is, for good and for ill. Desire, they're having their first sexual passions, first relationships in those years. Dreams of what they can be. You know, go right down the list. And Neil just sort of shrugs and said, I was just looking for things that began with D. And Neil's much more of a magician than I'll ever be. But the trick of being a magician is not to get lost in the magic, just to know where the rabbit is and look for it. And he was is extraordinarily good at pulling the rabbits out of his hat. And once in a while, I could get a bunny out of there. Sometimes it was just a peep. But thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to go sleep now.
All right.
I'm going to go teach some kids in the morning.
Well, thank you very much, Paul.
Take care, all.
Thank you, Paul.
How do I get out of here?
Boom.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on Pop XP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the Pop XP and over on Instagram at the Pop XP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.